today, filled in for Dennis Marburger last minute. Right now, he and his wife are visiting a family member in hospice care. So they're not going to be able, or he's not going to be able to be here tonight, so I'm filling in for him last minute. And also, we're not another scheduled speaker, Jeff Phillips, who was recently fired from his job in Lansing. Unjustly, from what it sounds like, he is not here as well, so we're down 2 tonight. So I was thinking at a certain point maybe we just have some like kind of an open mic type forum, give people a few minutes if they want to come up here and talk about whatever, because I'm sure we got a lot of things we're outraged about, terrified about, with things that are going on in the world right now. So first thing I wanted to get into is today is going to be the main focus of our meeting is going to be the red flag laws. So right now there is legislation that is active in Lansing to enact red flag laws. The good news is Representative Lee Chatfield, who is the House Speaker, who in my opinion has somewhat of a mixed record in terms of being a lawmaker. He talks a good game, but then might do a different thing behind the scenes. But he did say at the firearms march yesterday that I was at, the Second Amendment march in Lansing, where there's about 1,500 people who showed up during the day to promote the Second Amendment. So what Lee Chatfield said was that as long as he's Speaker, there will be no gun control passed out of the House under any circumstances. Amen. So he told the large group of constituents there that that would be a no-go, that would never happen. So that's good news, I think, that at least he's saying that publicly, that it was taped, and that it can be used against him in the future, but we can't take it for granted. We got to make sure that gun control dies. It doesn't even get to the point where it'll even be in Lee's hands. Right now it's in the House Judiciary Committee. I handed that flyer out. If you didn't get one, it's back there at the table. So give these people a call. Make sure that they have their phones ringing off the hook on this type of stuff, because more now than ever, we need our guns. With what we're seeing from the left, anyone who is to the right of John McCain these days is a terrorist or a white nationalist or a threat or something like that. Yeah, so it's anyway. I should say to the right of Karl Marx. Anyone who is even halfway right wing is a threat, and they're coming for your rights. So we need guns now more than ever, and I think there's a good chance if we are proactive and vigilant, we can, at the very least for the next legislative session, stop gun control from being passed. So we're not in a situation like in these other states, in these liberal-dominated states. One horrifying example is Connecticut, where in Connecticut, some guy posted a social media meme on Facebook. Someone ratted him out to the authorities based on that meme, and they came in, kicked in his door, took all of his guns, and now he's being charged with felonies. He's going to face up to 30 years in jail because he had illegal firearms in that state that he had bought in New Hampshire, like half hour away. So he's going to potentially have his whole life destroyed because someone didn't like a meme he posted on Facebook. And under the red flag law, the judge signed off on it, so now his rights were eviscerated. In Oregon, a pro-Trump activist who was an activist against Antifa in that state, he wrote something to the effect of that he would use hostile force against Antifa if his life depended on it. So he said that he would use self-defense against Antifa. So they kicked in his door, took all of his guns, and then locked him up in a mental institution for 20 days in Oregon. So we're seeing the horrifying horror stories already unfold in Texas. Unfortunately, you think Texas would be the reddest of the red states, right? No, it's not. Their whole Republican, their Republican Police Chiefs Association, the Republican governor, the Republican lieutenant governor are getting ready to fold on background checks and red flag laws right now. I just reported on that today for big league politics. So it's getting horrifying, and Rick Ector is going to come up here right now and explain exactly why these red flag laws are terrible. So come on up, Rick.
All right.
Yeah.
Feel free to put this on you wherever it works.
Wherever it works.
for you.
How does this look? Sharp. All right. Well, good evening. I'm Rick Ector. I am a gun rights advocate, firearms trainer here in the state of Michigan. Was just reported a few moments ago that there was a rally yesterday. And yes, I was definitely in attendance over at our state capitol in Lansing. It was our annual meeting when gun rights advocates get together to rally to ensure that our legislators, at least at the state level, see us and that they hear us and that they know our opinion on the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is very important to a lot of people in this state. It's one of those amendments that some people, don't think very highly of, but there are others such as me who are very ardent, very fervent supporters of the Second Amendment. I will concede that there was a time period, well, I guess, looking at my chronology personally, going back 15 years ago, I wasn't the most warmest, most enthusiastic supporter of gun rights. Family man, I lived in a decent neighborhood, so I did what most people thought that head of households, males would do, which is to have a 12-gauge shotgun in the house just in case someone forcibly entered the home. And as the protector of the household, it was my job to ensure safety against hostile forces. And, I didn't have a handgun. I didn't think that I needed one. Long story short, coming home from work, maybe 6 o'clock in the evening when it gets dark in the later stages of the year, I got robbed in my driveway. So that had a very huge influence on my perceptions of guns and gun ownership. So without haste, I went out and looked up the laws, saw that the laws at the state level had recently changed. So I took a class and I got my concealed pistol license. And I got so fired up about the fact that law-abiding citizens have this birthright via the Second Amendment to own arms, whether it's a long gun or whether it's a handgun, and to have that for their personal protection. So long story short, I'm still fired up. I'm still on fire about personal protection and self-defense. I became a firearms trainer through the National Rifle Association, and it got to a point where I was seeing a lot of things happening both at the state level and on the national level that I felt that I wanted to get involved. And it's so interesting to hear when Shane, our previous speaker, was just speaking a few moments ago. We see on the national level, there are things that could happen that could have an impact on us here in the state of Michigan. One of the things that has occurred nationally that causes me personally as a gun rights advocate some concern is that our president, Donald Trump, has mentioned that he is interested in doing something with red flag laws, okay? And then there are a lot of people who we talked about earlier who, I believe it's 17 states now that have enacted red flag laws over the last couple of years. It's the most fast-growing, insidious, evil legislation that is truly growing across the country. Yes, we had our Second Amendment march in Lansing just yesterday, and yes, I was in attendance. I was fortunate enough to be one of the speakers there. But the thing is that we must be ever vigilant. Even though we have a governor, Whitmer, who is hostile towards the Second Amendment and has recently called for red flag laws here in the state of Michigan, we are fortunate in the sense that both houses of our government at the state level have expressed no interest in doing anything with red flag laws. So that's very good. Some people, believe it or not, despite this virus of red flag laws, still haven't really heard much about it. And that's because we've been insulated from having pro-gun legislature here in the state of Michigan. We don't hear about some of the horror stories that are literally happening all over the country. So good place to start is, well, what exactly is a red flag law? A red flag law is some evil anti-gun legislation that jumps out at me, is that here in the state of Michigan and in basically every other state, there is some legislation that's already on the books to deal with people who are a threat to themselves or other people. And in general, what typically happens is that you'll be picked up and you'll taken to some place where you'll be observed, put under observation for, I believe, a 72-hour period where someone will now make a determination as to whether, if the situation's warrant, and I put that in quotation marks, because it's wide open as to what circumstances could trigger a person to actually get a secret proceeding against you. But it's wide open as to who can do one of these red flag orders against you. You look at the legislation. If you look at people when they speak, I was at a presentation that was done by State of Michigan State House Rep Robert Whitmer, and he was invited to this press conference. Basically, Fox 2 was there, and he was basically trying to sell the state of Michigan, and in particular Metro Detroit, on these red flag laws. He spinned it as a needed, very necessary, and benign legislation that would get people who are a danger to themselves and other people the help that they need. He never mentioned the fact that we already have this provision already on the books that if you're a danger to yourself and other people, you can be held for 72 hours and be observed by a healthcare professional. He didn't mention any of that. The reason why he was being, in my opinion, very deceptive about the nature of his legislation, because it is so heinous and evil. If someone, for whatever reason, whether it's personal or whether it's political, if someone is willing to tell a very negative and a very damning testimony against you and your character, this mere allegation in which you are denied due process. When I say denied due process, you're not told about this meeting, which is discussing you and your right to keep and bear arms. You're not even notified whatsoever. They're having this official proceeding where they're determining whether you should be stripped of your guns. And if this secret court feels that, yes, you are a danger to yourself, we're not going to your guns without a hearing. And if you can imagine, as this legislation has been enacted and it's actually been performed in several states across our country, there have been disastrous circumstances. For example, there are people who live in unsafe communities. And I know my personal character. I know I haven't done anything illegal. I know I haven't done anything for anyone to raid my home. If someone at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm legally eligible to have that gun, I have a concealed pistol license, which I don't need to protect myself at home, but I feel sufficiently empowered to protect myself at home. And people say, well, gee, Rick, aren't you a little paranoid? Absolutely not. I live in a community where if you turn on the news, I was just told by someone in the audience today, there was a story in the news media where someone's home was barged in and bad guys with guns came in to assault and offend the homeowners. This is a very real possibility. And if I know I'm a good person, and I know I'm a law-abiding citizen, I know I haven't broken any laws, the last thing I'm thinking is that the police are going to be kicking in my door. Unfortunately, in other states, this scenario has played out with disastrous consequences. The actual homeowner is shot and killed by law enforcement, and in many cases, this homeowner has no idea while people are stormtrooping his home. So, when I look at this proposed legislation here in the state of Michigan, I think it is something that we should definitely be knowledgeable of and something that we should fight very vehemently and strongly against. I take my personal example. I am a law-abiding citizen. I have a concealed pistol license. I have a firearm. I carry every single day. I don't harm anyone. I don't threaten to harm anyone. However, I have, in the opinion of a lot of people, I have some very interesting political opinions. I'm a very ardent and fervent supporter of the Second Amendment. I believe that if you feel that you want to exercise your right for the defense of yourself or the defense of the state, as explicitly mentioned in the state of Michigan Constitution, you should be able to have a home. And I speak very passionately about this right to a lot of groups and to a lot of organizations. And here's the thing. As a citizen exercising my First Amendment right, everyone should respect my right to speak openly in support of the Second Amendment. Everyone should support my Second Amendment right to actually have a gun and keep a gun. But see, that's not how these anti-gun people operate. They see me as the enemy. And as the enemy, they will do whatever they feel is necessary to silence me. If we red flag laws, they say, oh yeah, there's due process. And I'd say that they are lying to you. There is no such thing as due process if you are punished first and then later afforded an opportunity to defend yourself later. That's not due process. In fact, you are being punished first and convicted first. They have no qualms about depriving you of your property, your firearm, of depriving you of your right to due process. Due process is very important. In this country that I believe in, you have a right to face your accuser. Okay? Anyone can accuse you of anything. But here's the beauty of our system. Our system, the system that I believe in, you are presumed innocent until you have been convicted by a jury of your peers. And then upon your conviction, then, well, yeah, you can suffer whatever penalty exists on the books. But with respect to your gun rights, that can be extinguished immediately because of a false story, a lie, negative information designed to disarm you. Well, gee, Rick, well, certainly these stories, these insinuations, these things that they're saying about punishing people, about lying in court. You know, when I talked to when I talked to Representative Whitmer face to face when we were doing that Fox 2 story up at the Fox 2 studio, he said, yeah, there's due process. No, there's not due process. There's after the raid and you survive the raid, then you have to schedule a hearing before the court to prove that everyone was wrong and that you should not have been raided, that your guns should not have been taken, and that they should be returned to you. Well, just imagine for the vast majority of people, if you're going before a court proceeding, you're going to need something called representation. After all, the state is going to have its full army of prosecutors and researchers to determine how best to take your gun and keep you from your gun. Without representation, without lawyers, you're going to stand a very good chance of losing. So they're talking about convicting you with no due process, taking your property, invading your home, putting your life in danger without due process. They're going to punish you first. Legitimate dangers to themselves. We're talking about depriving you of your constitutional rights. And here's the big thing. One of the big things to me about these false accusers is that there is no penalty for them to lie about you. Okay? When I asked Representative Whitmer about this, when he said, yeah, there's some provisions there. Well, if you actually read the bill as it's written, it's on the state of Michigan's legislature's website. Read it. It's only 12 pages long. So I promise you can get it done in 15, 20 minutes. The legalese isn't that bad. If you read it, it says that if anyone levies false testimony against you, that they could be subject to, get this, contempt of court. You may be subject to contempt of court. Whenever I hear someone say may, and it's just something about how my brain works, I also hear subconsciously that means may not. There is no certainty that you will suffer any consequences for false testimony. And then the consequence that you may or may not be subjected to is contempt of court. Well, gee, that doesn't sound ominous to me. Contempt of court is, I don't know, you said something the judge didn't like. Fined you or maybe imprison you for a couple of hours or a couple of days. It's not that big of a deal. Some judges will probably disagree with me. But at the end of the day, contempt of court is not that big of a deal. Here's my thing. My feeling on the matter is, if someone was so emboldened to go to a court and to willfully manufacture a wives' tale, an out-and-out lie against my character and my behavior and my actions that rose to the level of a secret warrant being executed upon my residence, that person, that false witness, should suffer more than just contempt of court. That person, in my opinion, should be subjected to a felony. It should be a felony to levy false testimony against someone who becomes a subject of a at-risk, high-risk, red flag search and warrant. That person should go to prison, not jail, to prison for at least 1 year.
There's exceptions.
I'm sorry?
There are exceptions.
Exceptions to?
False testimony in court.
Well, in the legislation that I read with regards to red flag laws as they're proposing it, I didn't see any exceptions listed. Here's the thing.
In the state of Michigan right now, there's an exception. A police officer can lie in court and not be prosecuted.
And that's the other piece of this thing. Law enforcement. Not only anyone you know personally, all levels of law enforcement can get a red flag against you. So let's just think of, I don't know, some extreme example. Extreme example is you have contact with law enforcement. You're not feeling very gregarious that day. As a matter of fact, you're having a bad day. You don't even have your first cup of coffee. You don't execute your best manners. That police officer is offended at your disposition. He sees the NRA bumper sticker. He runs a lien check. He sees that you're a gun owner. He sees that you have a concealed pistol license. You're in the state of Michigan, you have to mandatorily disclose that information on a stop anyway, whether it's on foot or in a vehicle or otherwise. Upon being stopped, if you're carrying a gun concealed with a concealed pistol license, you have to immediately inform that police officer. Well, I'm not going to say all police officers are bad. I'm not even going to say the majority of them. However, I do acknowledge that they are people like anyone else. And in every profession and in every field, you have good people and you have people that are not so good. You have people who might in fact be bad apples that have not been weeded out of the population yet. So you could conceivably have a police stop. This person, by virtue of your voluntary disclosure, they confirmed it in the lien system. They know that you're a gun owner, but you know what? They're a bad person. They don't like you. They go to this secret court and they tell all these great stories about you. And here's the thing. Everyone believes law enforcement, right? That's just one of those natural predispositions that we have. So let's just say this rarely occurring law enforcement officer tells something about you that's not true, that rises to the level of a red flag pre-dawn raid on your home. You're risking being shot and killed during the raid, okay? And once you survive the raid, hopefully, they then take your gun without due process. You then have to have money to afford a lawyer after the fact to get your gun back. And, you know, fortunately for us, most defensive handguns, even though, you know, they're pricey, $500-600 if you want to get a good one, when you look at the costs associated with representation, of consulting with an attorney, hiring an attorney, retaining an attorney, you're looking at a Pyrrhic victory. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to consult with a lawyer, but they went to law school, and going to law school isn't cheap. And one of the great consequences of going to law school is that you have to pay those loans back. Well, many lawyers are expensive. And if we're talking about a long, dragged-out, drawn-out process, it probably would be beyond the means of many people to have the financial wherewithal to defend themselves in court. The thing that a lot of people really don't acknowledge is that there are people who do not have a lot of money, a lot of people who are literally living paycheck to paycheck. And they manage to squirrel away a little bit of money to buy a gun for the home, to defend the home. And if they, by fortune, are good enough or to have the financial wherewithal to have a concealed pistol license and go through that process, take the class, and then apply for the license and get approved through the state, then you're at risk of having this gun taken away from you. So it's just evil all the way around. From the simple fact that you could be convicted in secrecy without due process, have a raid executed upon your home, have your property seized, and then there's a very financial consequence of trying to rectify this problem. It's a losing proposition. The big issue is that you, based on a mere suspicion or a lie, can be stripped of your rights and your property and then be forced to defend yourself afterwards. Now, I'm not totally unreasonable. I believe that if a person lies against you in a court of law on a red flag execution, you should be subjected to the punishment of a felony. I also believe you should pay a substantial fine, at least $5,000. Well, gee, Rick, you're trying to discourage people from executing one of these red flag provisions against a bad person. No, I'm not. I'm trying to discourage someone from lying and entering false testimony against someone merely for political reasons, to disarm them and take away their property. I contend that we have more than what we need on the books currently to address any situation. Here's the big apparent secret that a lot of people are not aware about. We have at least 2 Supreme Court decisions who have clearly determined whose responsibility it is to make sure that you and your family is safe. I'm going to give you a huge hint. It is not law enforcement. Through these 2 Supreme Court decisions, a law enforcement officer can actually witness you being victimized, to witness you being shot and or killed, and if that police officer fails to act to protect you, they will not suffer any legal consequences for not preventing you from being a victim of violent crime. There is one person whose job that is, and we know clearly whose job that is. The Supreme Court has told us on no less than 2 occasions that that job is your job. It is your job to make sure that you're safe. It is your job to make sure that your home is not home invaded. It is your job to protect your family. So as a gun rights advocate, as a firearms instructor, I've dedicated my life to educating people of these facts. And I'm here to tell you that if, for example, let's just assume there's bad people in the world. And let's say there's a legitimate bad person that has credibly informed you that they wish to hurt you. There is something that you can do. Yes, you can embrace your constitutionally recognized right to own a firearm. You can buy a gun. You can get an emergency concealed pistol license without training. In the state of Michigan and in many other states, once you produce documentation from a court that you had a bad person trying to do a bad thing to you, as evidenced by a personal protection order that is currently available under current law, you can immediately get an emergency concealed pistol license. Okay? You will be issued the license on the spot, assuming, of course, you meet all the other requirements, right? You can pass a background check, for example. You get your emergency concealed pistol license, and I would suggest that you get training as soon as you can. As a matter of fact, there are tons of firearms instructors in the area. Do your due diligence, find a good one, get trained, satisfy your educational requirements for that emergency concealed pistol license, and then go back to that court within 2 weeks, show your certificate, and make that concealed pistol license permanent. So in essence, what I'm telling you is that once we recognize and we accept the fact that personal protection is our job, that we step up to the plate and actually do what's required. If necessary, get the training. If necessary, buy a firearm. But step up and protect yourself, protect your family, and protect your home. And even better yet, for all the reasons I talked about earlier, turn your back on this proposed red flag law legislation. It is evil, it is heinous, it discriminates against you, it strips away your right to due process and puts your life in danger with these pre-dawn raids by law enforcement. With that, I want to thank you all very much for allowing me the opportunity to speak.
Very good.
Questions? I love questions. Yes, sir.
I don't have a question, but I'm telling you, everything that you say about this lack of due process is already in place with personal protection orders. Like you talk about, people don't like you, they lie. You know, a lot of people, as long as you're kind of a little better connected, you make up a story about somebody and you get something called an ex parte PPO against the person.
As a matter of fact, I've recommended that a lot of people get those.
Yeah, but the thing is, there is absolutely zero due process. Somebody calls up a cop and say, "Hey, police officer, can you write up a little crime story? I want to get a PPO against somebody." And they say, "Sure," and then you get served with this.
It is extremely possible that someone can get an ex parte PPO. But here's the great thing about that process.
I had 4 of them issued against me because I was complaining about people in government.
Here's
now, if there was red flags in place, you know, they'd probably do that against me too if I was a firearm.
If someone doesn't like you and they're not going to suffer any consequence for their bad behavior, guess what? They're going to do it.
Yeah, and there's no consequence. They do not prosecute. You know, I go to court with all this evidence, you know, and the person's lying. They're lying through their teeth. Nothing happens to them.
And see, that's another thing that really needs to happen. As I mentioned earlier, once someone is willing to go into a court of law and suborn perjury, and make false statements against you in a court of law, once it is determined that they have been lied, I think that they should suffer a penalty greater than contempt of court. I support the fact of these people being convicted of a felony and that they pay a substantial fine. Yes.
Let's take for example, let's just say out of the blue, what's his name again?
Rick Hector.
Let's ask all the police and say, yeah, I saw Rick kill, it was Rick killed Jimmy Hawkins who did it. Okay, I'm lying to the police.
Right.
So he would get put away for life for murder. Because I lied about it, I'm the guy that should get the murder sentence.
You know what? As I mentioned before, sometimes some people, no matter how great you are not going to like you. And sometimes they may not like you because of how you look, how you act, where you live. It's just a fact of life that some people are just not going to like you. Here's the thing. You should not enable people who do not like you to be able to use our legal system as a weapon, to weaponize our laws, to cause your rights to be taken away from you and deny you your due process. Which to me, in a nutshell, is why these red flag laws are evil.
Well, it happens all the time.
It does. But see, one of the great things about some of the better judges, and I wanted to say this, is that when you go to a court, there is a person in a robe sitting on a bench. He hears the testimony, and a lot of times he hears these ex parte claims that someone is a threat to you, and they want an ex parte, your Latin, that means from the person, from the part, that person, the other part isn't there, right? So they're only getting one side of the story. Many judges, unless this story has a lot of documentation that's presented at the court in that time, if there has been some history of some type of documented stalking, documented physical abuse, medical bills and medical statements and things of that nature, judges are reluctant to issue these ex parte personal protection orders. But some of them will. It's judge dependent. They say YMMV, your mileage may vary. Yeah. It depends.
And the thing is, like, when I had that happen to me, somebody called the police, they wrote this big thing. I goes to see the police. Can you please tell me what this is all about? Sorry, we can't talk to you.
Under investigation.
Yeah. Like these are cops and detectives. They never heard of the word investigate. Sorry, we can't talk to you. And I went to court. You know what happened? I walk into the courtroom. The judge says, you stand outside the courtroom. Yeah,
so sorry to hear that happened, man. Because you know what? Like many people in here, I'm sure we've all had the unfortunate incident of someone saying something bad about you that wasn't true. Exactly. And it's a fact of life that if you live long enough, you will come across that situation in which someone impugns your character.
Yeah, but these people abuse the law to hurt you.
There are people that do that, which is why we have, the Bill of Rights, man. You're presumed innocent until proven in a court of law that you are guilty. Hopefully with evidence and not without denying you due process. Yes.
Hey, Rick, these red flag laws, they can also affect non-gun owners, right? Let's just say Kathy and I get into a Facebook tiff. Right. All right? And I'm so mad at her, I'm going to fix her good. I'm going to call the police and say, hey, Kathy verbally said she's going to come and shoot me. She's got a gun in her house. Wouldn't they then maybe issue a red flag warrant?
There could be. And there have been cases in other states where that has indeed happened.
So the non-gun owners are affected as well.
And the thing is that it weaponizes speech. Okay? And here's the thing. I personally believe that we should be nice to one another if we can't at least respect one another. But sometimes, you get roped into these political conversations and some people say things in the heat of the moment, or things might be said relatively benignly, but you know what? The way it's interpreted, it could trigger under the right circumstances and the right personalities for a Facebook post to lead to police showing up at your front door.
You don't know. Seriously, John and I, we've owned a 7-Eleven store for 49 years, okay? We've been robbed numerous times, him, me.
So sorry to hear about that.
But anyway, we carry that kind of thing. We have to, to the bank, things like that. People follow you.
Well, that makes perfect sense.
But anyway, one day I was in the store, this is years ago, and I'm reading the Oakland Press, and it says that we were being charged with murder. Down at Kathy Irvine, 7-Eleven store. Okay, and I'm like, oh my God, what is this about?
Right.
We had no idea. Some kid supposedly stole a bottle of beer from our store, but it didn't even happen, to be honest with you. It was another store, but they're always looking for money. You know, they couldn't get money from this person, the lawyer couldn't.
Right.
So they're gonna move on to another one. So this kid supposedly was like, you know, a half a mile from our store, and he went to help someone who had a flat tire. And there was a beer bottle on the side of the road.
Okay.
And the guy broke the beer bottle and got ticked off at this kid and told him to get away, hit him in the jugular, killed him.
Wow.
The beer bottle came from our store. It was a weapon. So it's like, it didn't come from our store. We don't even know. But they used us. It's all about.
Well, you know, the thing is,
So it
and
could
the
be
thing
anything
that your
that
story
they're-
illustrates, though, is that it had nothing to do with the firearm per se, but still, you had your right to due process at least respected, right? You had to at least be notified that someone made an allegation against you, right?
But you always have to prove your innocence first.
Well, you're presumed innocent.
No,
You're
you're not.
presumed innocent until
you're
proven
not.
guilty.
They
No,
arrest
you're
you.
guilty.
Notwithstanding these red flag laws. Then it's opposite. Then you're punished, and then if you have the financial wherewithal, then you can go to a court and petition your right to defend your character, presumably at your cost.
Right, exactly. I mean, that is just one of many. I mean, seriously, there's been so many.
Don't
And
they
it's
arrest you
ridiculous.
first?
Don't they what?
Don't they arrest you first if the police officer says a statement, says, oh, you know, he did something illegal?
Well, I tell you, with these red flag laws, you're not even getting arrested. But see, here's the thing. That's the thing about the so-called justification for these red flag laws. These people will tell
Is
you.
that that new bill that Gretchen just wrote that's being submitted before the, they just had it on there. They talked about a bill that she's, between her and some other state representatives that wrote a bill that was submitted.
Well, they probably didn't even write it. The anti-gun groups, they write these bills, and sometimes when they write the bill, they don't even bother to change the name off of it from the last person in another state and submit it in their state. But they have these boilerplate lawsuits, and they just tell all of their members of these anti-groups, here, copy this off our website and submit it in the court of law. Well, not submit it in the court of law, but at least get the bill started in your legislature, and hopefully you can get some positive media coverage. Hopefully you can pyramid off of some tragic story that happened in the news media. Hopefully you have a contact and you'll get a story, and given the right circumstances, maybe you'll get lucky and have this evil legislation enacted in your jurisdiction.
Who's who's starting up the red flag? Is that part of the,
Well, I know that the red flag law, a bill was submitted at least a year ago by, what's his name? I know I mentioned it earlier.
usually insurance companies are the ones writing the bills. If you go back and,
Well, I mean, there are people who will assist and help our legislators by, writing bills for them, and they just put their names on them and submit them. But, that's the nature of our legal system.
Yeah. I'm going to say something not as a question, but last year I ran as a state rep candidate in the 41st district. There were 2 other Republicans and 1 other Democrat running, and at the League of Women Voters, a red flag question came up.
Okay.
I was the only one that stood up and said that I was against red flag laws because of everything that Rick said tonight. And the Oakland County Commissioners voted in favor of the red flag laws. And one of the candidates that was running in the 41st district was Doug Teets, who was the county commissioner at the time.
Well, see, the whole due process thing. I mean, someone I could just hypothetically, I could say, okay, for some reason, I don't like you, right? I don't know. You got your legs crossed in the meeting, right? I don't like people who do that. Are just untrustworthy. It so bothered me that I went to a court and told them some fantastic lie about how dangerous you are. You don't know about it. you're not informed, you're not there to tell your side of the story, and the very next day or next week, there's a raid on your house. Heaven forbid, you survive, right? Because there are cases where police go to the wrong house, and sometimes the owner of that property, they actually shoot police officers because they're thinking, okay, it's a bad person. There was this case, and it escapes me right now. I wish I had researched it again before I showed up. But there was a homeowner that shot a police officer who was on a raid through a warrant, but it had the wrong address. Okay, and so the prosecutor's office in that jurisdiction was trying to charge the homeowner because the police went to the wrong house because the wrong address was put on the warrant. And, luckily, that court held, well, look, it's not that homeowner's job to make sure that the right address is on the right search warrant. And if and I hate to say it, I don't want to be perceived as anti-law enforcement, but I mean, if you barge into someone's home, it's the wrong home because you were given the wrong information. If someone thinking that their home is under attack because they're not criminals, they might shoot you. And if they do because they have a genuine fear of their lives, I don't think that they should be punished. So I agree with that court. Yes.
I want to circle back to what I think is really the most pernicious part of this legislation, and that is the speech rights threat that it represents. Because a lot of talk's been made here about somebody lying about you. That isn't all that will work in this red flag situation. It's enough for somebody to point out that you have, for instance, posted on a blog your ardent intention to abide by the founder's purpose behind the Second Amendment, which is to thwart the imposition of tyranny by the state.
Okay.
If you were to make an impassioned statement to the effect that you intend to exercise that authority, the authority that is reflected in the constitutional provision of the Second Amendment, and ensure that a tyrannical state is subdued if necessary, that could be viewed as representing a threat to others.
It really could, because you know what?
And it's going to go there. That's maybe the 5 steps
perfect
down the road.
example.
But it's
Yesterday,
going to start short of that, and it's going to go towards that.
Yesterday, I was literally at a gun rights rally, and we're on the steps of the Capitol building. Okay, and I'm saying, hey, you have a right to keep and bear arms to defend yourself against all enemies, right? Foreign and domestic. Someone could say, hey, we have videotape evidence of Rick Ector, threatening to use his gun to shoot tyrants and people who would, pervert our Constitution, people who would violate his home, who would come in unannounced. Rick said he would shoot them. He's dangerous. Let's get a red flag provision enacted against him and take all of his guns, and let's not tell him about it, and let's not give him a trial. Let's just punish him because he's bad, because he likes guns in the Second Amendment. It's evil.
The thing is, they can put a PPO on, anybody can put a PPO on somebody else.
Well, you tell a good enough story, yeah.
No, you just file it. You file a complaint against them, a complaint that says he's threatening me. You file it with the court, and just post it and have it on there. Thing is,
it still has to pass muster by a judge. That's not to say that some judges are more permissive than others, but it still goes across a judge's desk. Some judges say, well, hey, this is a serious thing you're doing here, this PPO ex parte. I see you have a couple of incidents here. No one's property was damaged. No one was hurt. Your one-sided allegations, well, they're concerning, but in my personal opinion, they don't rise to a certain level. And some judges will deny it. Some will say, hey, this person owns a gun, I'll sign it immediately. It all depends on which judge gets that ex parte PPO review.
So the complaint has to be answered, don't it?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Ex parte means that the other side of the party isn't even notified. And if you're a law-abiding CPO holder, you'll say, police officer, before you say anything, I'm required by state law here in Michigan to say, I have a concealed pistol license and I have a gun. And they look in the system and say, oh, you have a gun, huh? And it's on you right now. Okay, we see that you haven't been officially notified, so I'm going to officially tell you right now, there's an ex parte PPO filed against you, and you cannot legally own a gun.
I got a ticket about 25 years ago. The cop's walking up to the side of the car, and on this little radio that he's got on his shoulder, it says he's got a gun. I could hear it. He's got a gun. So I don't have to notify this guy that I got a gun because
No, you still have to notify.
The law says immediately notify law enforcement officer upon being stopped that you have a concealed pistol license and that you have a pistol. Okay? If you don't have the gun on you, you know, the law is silent and most people construe that as you don't have to notify. I would just say as a caveat, just from talking with a lot of law enforcement officers, it's a courtesy that they would appreciate if you would extend it to them. But there are some diehard supporters of the Constitution and following the law. And if you don't have to, some people say you shouldn't because you don't have a gun on you, and you know what, you should notify. But if the police officer looks, he gets offended, that kind of takes things downhill a little bit. Because I will tell you this, and I probably shouldn't say this as we're taping it, but I will say this. Without exception, a lot of times a police officer, if you're professional, you're nice, you're courteous, you do your due diligence in terms of notifying them that you have a concealed pistol license, they're in like a really great mood. They feel really good that you extended the courtesy to them. And you know what? Sometimes they'll just let you off with a warning. Now, this could be the Rick Ector treatment. I don't know. You can't expect this to happen to you. Question.
Well, yeah, when you give that to them, that automatically means you're not a felon, right?
Well, it means you can pass a background check.
Right, so they can breathe a little easier. Rick, I just want to ask this. It's a great topic. Are you willing to hang around and take a bunch more questions? We can take a 5-minute break,
Sure.
get some food, and then
Sure.
get back at it. Does that sound good?
We will take a pizza break.
All right.
I'm going to have some pizza myself, and then I guess Shane is going to do his thing, and then after Shane, I'd be more than happy to
No,
come.
yeah, feel free to come back up here. And
I'll come back up and take some more questions. Sure.
Okay, great.
All right, let's do pizza.
All right.
Amen.
Well, the guest of honor should go get the first pizza.
Check out the microphone.
Oh, yeah.
Now, don't go away. We're coming back. We're going to take a pizza break. I will be back in about 15 minutes, maybe less, to finish up the evening here. Thanks a lot. Don't go away.